So my name is Jen Pearlman. I am running for Congress down in Florida's 23rd Congressional District, which is Southern Broward and a little bit of Miami-Dade County. And we are a very safe blue seat. So really the race that matters the most is the primary. And I am challenging Debbie Wasserman Schultz down here in the August primary.
All right.
And I'm Tom Wells in CD3. Open seat race, 10 Republicans competing to decide which one is more like Trump than the other. So in August, that's not going to pay off. In November, that's not going to pay off. In August, we will decide which Democrat will defeat the Republican in District 3.
So open format, you guys can just discuss issues if you like, however you want to do it.
So what have been your topics so far this evening?
Mainly everybody's talking about COVID and Medicare for all, and the tremendous savings and the corruption incident upon the decision that the Supreme Court foisted upon us 45 years ago that money is equal to political speech. It's been downhill from there. So
yeah, I think that the COVID pandemic has been an opportunity for us on the progressive side. So on the one hand, it's hard because we've lost our ability to canvass. And so that is difficult for a grassroots campaign. I mean, we're going to find out if a grassroots campaign can be really successful without door knocking for the first time. But I think we have this amazing opportunity to really control the narrative and the content in a way that we weren't necessarily able to before, in terms of things like Medicare for all, universal basic income, paid sick leave, things that are now, I think, more apparent to a lot of people. The idea that it's insane to have healthcare connected to employment. Now that we just saw 30 million people are just lost their jobs. So, that's a problem when you also now have no health care for those people in the middle of a pandemic. So I think we have an opportunity to kind of control the narrative better.
well, we have not only an opportunity, but an absolute obligation, because we are facing devastation in this country that comparable to what we have visited upon other countries by our sanctions. We have sanctioned our own country. And Mitch McConnell is using the non-nationalization of the response to the pandemic, the idea, the incredibly base idea that it is a state's problem and they should pay their way. And when the states go broke, it represents mismanagement, so we'll allow them to go bankrupt, and the consequences of that have been played out in Puerto Rico. You have to impose austerity, which begins with eliminating pensions for state workers, and then Medicaid funds run out. The only thing that's left is, bailouts for corporations in Florida.
Well, that's what they just did.
Yeah.
Isn't that what they just did? Didn't they just give? Did I hear something about Steve Mnuchin being given up to a $6 trillion slush fund? Is that basically what happened?
They put oversight onto the last relief bill, and then Trump fired the inspector generals who were specifically put in place to provide that oversight, and the laws were written, and Steve Mnuchin has chosen to disobey the intent of Congress, which they could enforce if we had a Congress that actually did anything, but they are not enforcing that intent. And
well, we know why. I mean, yes. It's not like a mystery. We know exactly why. I mean, do you think that the people in Congress are on a different team than, say, someone like Steve Mnuchin?
Well, what I tell people is the Democrats, the Republicans, amazingly, are like the Harlem Globetrotters, and the Democrats are the Washington Generals. They're paid to lose.
It seems it has become that now, whether or not it was ever intentional, but it has become where we're dealing with what is a contrived opposition, because it really isn't when you're both answering to the same corporate overlords. Right. So it's not a real opposition. It's this color war facade. that keeps us all divided, when in fact, the only division is really the financial division from the top 1% and the rest of us.
I think it's the top 0.001%, actually. And the top 400 families are now, after the 2017 tax bill, top 400. How do you make a law that's so specific that it only applies to 400 families? Paying less taxes as a percentage than the poorest 20% of the population. So, yeah, both parties have the pretense of opposition, but the reality of just being gift factories for the corporate owners. And Pelosi this year has not had a single conference bill. Everything that Mitch McConnell passes comes back to the House, passed immediately by large majorities of both parties. And Pelosi can get away with this partly because the media has been building her political capital because they knew she would be expending it by wasting all this Democratic majority doing nothing. So when she tears up the piece of paper, when she claps like this, these were celebrated in the liberal media as evidence of her, I don't know what. I never understood it.
It's Mick resistance. It's Mick resistance. And it's literally political theater. That's what it looks like. And, you know, there are unfortunately a lot of people who follow mainstream media and just really have one way of looking at this. And it's just that very vote blue, no matter who kind of, you know, we got to get rid of Trump. That's where everybody on the, you know, the Democrats, or your, you know, basic rank and file Democrats anyway, they really believe that if only we could get rid of Trump, it's good. Like that's the problem right there.
Well, I have a PhD in theoretical physics. I like to mention that because the people who are going to vote for me are not going to be offended by that. But it is a perspective, a middle perspective of looking at the big picture and trying to see what the moving parts are doing. And this is a lot easier than the microwave engineering I've been doing. The politics is so clear cut. And all we have to do is show people what's behind the shadows, pull aside the curtain, show them first that the emperor has no clothes, but that he has followers who are doing pretty much what he wants in both parties. 2016 and 2020 and 2012 and 2008 have all been lessons that people are really tired of what's happening. They know it's bad and they won't change. Obama change. Then we go, well, we're going to run a old school Hillary Clinton versus this rebel who's saying change. And
now he hasn't lived up to his populist, campaign message.
Well,
there are a lot of people that I do think supported him for the populist undertones and things like getting out of the wars and bringing manufacturing back. And I think that is very appealing to a lot of people. Now, the people that have been paying attention have seen that he has not satisfied that. He has not done those things. But, the Democrats are not offering someone who has. So, they're not giving a much better option as far as that's concerned.
Well, at this point, I agree with Noam Chomsky that if the election is today, I'm voting for Biden. But I will do so in grief and despair because my children, my grandchildren will suffer from that choice. Not as much as Trump, though. Now, 3 months from now, I keep my mind open that I really think that we have no idea of what the situation will be because we have reopened our economy without having done any of the prerequisites. While our pandemic is spreading rapidly and more virulently than any other country, we say we've solved the problem.
Well, we are the best, so we are number one.
In deaths and number of cases and yes. And,
I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens between now and November.
No, it's
And I, you know, people keep saying, oh, Biden, 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 but you know, he is not the nominee yet. He is a presumptive nominee. And this, if I have noticed anything in the past few years, is that things happen very quickly sometimes, and you never know what's around the next corner with the political theater. So I am reserving any statement on that until there is an official nominee. Once there is an official nominee, I will better be able to.
I made my statement, and you understand it. It's an open statement. And God, I fear the things that are happening in the next 3 months. They're going to be terrible.
You do realize, though, that a huge part of the problem are people your age, are the older people. Like, I mean, my parents are an anomaly, and you're an anomaly.
Profiled, it should be people who look like me. My generation has pretty much destroyed the world while we were watching football or something.
Well, and what's amazing to me, and actually I hear a lot of this from my parents, because they live in a community that has a lot of older people, and my parents are 70s, but they're very young 70s. My parents were hippies. They're very progressive. They've always been kind of on the correct side. So, but they meet a lot of their friends regularly, and these people just truly do not care. They just how to get rid of Trump. The environment, these are not things that keep them up at night. My mom is stressed out about it, but most of her friends feel like, well, they have their Medicare, so they don't, you know, it doesn't matter to them. And they really do not see the climate crisis as the crisis that it really is. And I think a lot of that has to do with the media that they watch and the message that they get and how their media prioritizes what's important. You know, they're probably watching like MSNBC. And so all they know is got to get rid of Trump. And they're not, because I mean, look, we know our media is not covering the climate crisis like they ought to.
But gee, fancy that. The media is owned by the same people who own the big corporations. Right. They made a point of buying the most prestigious newspapers. And
well, that's the thing. And people will read the Washington Post, and I'm like, you realize that's basically just Jeff Bezos' opinion, essentially. I mean, it's basically the world according to Jeff Bezos. And I just, you know, yeah, there's sometimes that there are newsworthy things in the Washington Post.
That's the subtlety, is that in Russia, the propaganda was very effective, even though everybody knew it was propaganda. And here, they're subtle enough that they mix in a little actual news with the propaganda, so that it's much more difficult for people. Because, yes, I pick up good things from the New York Times.
Yes, every once in a while, there's a little fragment of something that's going on. It's just a matter of what they choose to cover, when they choose to cover it. And that alone is the huge bias. You know, look how long it took for them to cover the Tara Reade situation. Look how long it took that she had to give, 3 interviews to alternative media, and she had tried for a year to get them to pay attention to her. And so that level of bias in terms of selecting what we get to see is a huge problem.
Well, the more consequential problem was the treatment by the mainstream media of Bernie Sanders in the series of primaries.
Of course.
They delayed publishing results when he won, but the results are right there as when he loses.
Not even when he loses. How about when he wins and the headline is, wow, Amy Klobuchar came in 3rd. Wow, how amazing. And that's the headline. Yeah. You know, or, well, Pete had a great second showing, or whatever, you know, whatever it was, even when it was a time Bernie won.
I think was the phrase. Yes. No, it's so remarkable, but I speak the same to everybody. I don't care who's watching this. Biden was probably the weakest candidate in the field in terms of his record. Your record is not the positions that you've held, it's the things that you have done. Elizabeth Warren endorsed Biden, and her whole life, her whole career in politics has been devoted to overturning those things which Joe Biden produced. So the lack of integrity there is palpable. I understand, I see from that the immense force that the DNC applies And the DNC and the RNC doesn't have to cheat as much because everybody's bad. But the DNC has to suppress the guys who might be tending to be interesting or useful. So we're going to be there. We're going to do this stuff. We're going to convince everybody that the Congress has to revolt. They have to pass single-payer health care. And when they do pass single-payer health care, their re-elections can only be secured if they also pass public funding of elections at a generous and clean level so that the angry lobbyists can just disappear into the woodwork.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually don't have a problem with this concept of what is a lobbyist. In fact, it's funny, I actually went to law school to be a lobbyist because I wanted to lobby for nonprofit. It's the money that's the problem.
Exactly.
It's like you want there to be experts in particular fields that help guide with certain things and help you actually craft legislation. Like, for example, you want somebody representing all the small farmers. Well, that would be, that's a lobbyist. They're going to come and they're going to say, this is what's in the best interest. So it's like everything, it's not all bad. It's just there can't be a financial transfer.
I am guilty of using the terminology most simply, and a more sophisticated terminology is worth it. By lobbyists, I mean directly people who use money and the legalized bribery that's the Supreme Court decisions in 1976 and 78 by a guy who wrote the book, the Lewis Powell Memorandum. He was on the Supreme Court. Nixon put him there. They voted to equate money with political speech. And the results were that lobbying, which had been kind of quiet, we can't afford new furniture, maybe we can get a secretary next year, low-funded thing because they didn't produce much interesting results, to a high-profile profit center for Boeing, profit center for the health insurance industry, profit center for the pharmaceutical company, which has a double whammy that it hollows out the companies which see their profit centers in lobbying. And Boeing forgets to do engineering because the lobbyists were able to get them exclusions from retesting the frigging airplane when they completely changed it. And
I think it's like a lot of things, when you're talking about it, when it's a very for-profit driven reason, and that's a big difference. So you're talking about like big pharma or the military industrial complex, and these things we know are for profit for the benefit of shareholders and the very elite and the people who are running these companies, as opposed to lobbying groups and organizations that represent groups of whatever industry or people or teachers or there are certain
absolutely
things.
I mean, to be clear, when a lobbyist convinces you to vote to not negotiate drug prices in Medicare Part D 2004, when Medicare is required to pay whatever price people charge and no one else in the world pays that price,
right?
That is not an argument. That is simple theft.
It is. It's theft. I think, we have to come to an agreement as a civilization that there's just certain industries that should not be for-profit industries. And it's, to me, it's always healthcare, public education, and corrections are way up there. And there's probably other things too. I believe in net neutrality. I believe in, a lot of things where it's for the public good.
ISPs have become a utility. So we should have the benefit, we should build it out like the post office where everybody in the country has it available at the same price. And no one is disadvantaged.
Yes, I agree. I think that when you think of things that are common civilization things, like things for the common good, it just makes sense for those to not have a profit motive. All right. It really is just it's an equitable thing. And so, I always say, people they think they like to have their choice of their insurance company and whatever that is. And I'm like, but that's a for-profit thing. That has to do with the profit. Imagine if you needed a fire department and you actually had to sit there and like bargain shop for the fire departments because they were making a profit.
What it was in Rome in around 0 AD, the fire company would come rushing to the burning mansion and then they would sit and negotiate the purchase of the property from the owner. And as it burned, the price pretty much went down, which is where the phrase fire sale comes from.
It's sad, but that's the reality. I think that, that is the problem of completely unfettered capitalism, is the human nature is just not.
Government exists to create a fair market, not a free market. That word has been so abused, but a fair market where there is competition, or you socialize the sector, where any harm you do in your product, such as death of millions of children by the fossil fuels, you have a social cost, you pay that as a tax up front.
Instead, we give subsidies. See, we like to reward bad behavior and discourage good behavior. That's what we do. So like here in Florida, we give the sugar industry subsidies instead of charging them for the crimes against the ecosystem that they're perpetrating.
Oh, yes. Well, and our super rich governor would give sugar the whole of South Florida just for a $50,000 donation. I mean, they sell us cheap.
Yeah. Did you notice that the state convention, the Democratic convention, was sponsored by Big Sugar?
Well, fancy that. There was a Harvard research article 50-something years ago, which was comparing sugar to animal fat. And it was a meta-study by famous Harvard faculty. And it came to the conclusion that sugar was not as bad as animal fat, which is exactly the opposite of reality. And they doctored the reports and did the study, and the $50,000 back then bought you a reorganization of the food pyramid by the FDA.
Yeah, sugar is very toxic. Like refined white sugar is like basically poison to our people. That's one of the things that I think is like crippling a lot of the health of people in this country.
When you have single-payer health care, you can start taxing the cost of things like cigarettes at the social cost, and of sugar and sweetened drinks, so that the cost comes out of the money we have to pay for health care.
Yeah, I think that, but instead, right, so the sugar industry should be paying for that, not receiving subsidies for that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, government by the people would be such a shock. The companies that actually compete for our money with their goods and services would be the ones that function. And they need engineers, and they need technicians, they need qualified people, and they need union members on the management, because the union members on the line know how to make the line better. And
so what do you think about getting rid of the right to work laws?
I would subvert them this way, that when we, okay, this is 2 minutes almost. When we double the minimum wage in a month or 3 months to allow people to calculate the fractional cost of labor and the new prices, we will then have done the opposite of trickle-down tax cuts. They come into effect instantly. Why not the wages come into effect instantly? And that will then reveal other faults within the economic system. You can correct those faults by saying the minimum wage, of course, should be tied to productivity, not just the cost of living. Productivity is rising faster, and you need people who can buy what you're making. So then you should write union contracts which are tied to the minimum wage, so that when the minimum wage goes up, every labor category in the union goes up. And since everybody would be wanting to join a union because their bosses might not see the equity in raising their wages just because the minimum wage went up, we will recognize at the federal level that, hey, having people in unions reduces the injury rate, reduces the cost of the federal government, the cost of medical care. So why don't we chip in on their union dues and thus vitiate right to work laws? We don't have to go to the state.
So sort of go around them is what you're saying. You just go right around them.
You know, I've been thinking about these things for 4 years as I'm walking on the streets and knocking on doors.
Yeah.
And, you start out thinking you know something, and 4 years later you know a lot. you know a lot more, and your boundary of ignorance is a lot bigger.
Yeah, that's true. It's sort of the more you know, the more you also know you don't know. And
I know really bright people too.
oh yeah, well, no, only bright people really are able to recognize the things that they don't know. Like that takes a certain amount of knowledge and self-awareness in and of itself.
Which is totally, Trump does not know that there is anyone who knows anything that he does not know. He's saying, people never knew that there were so many deaths from flu. Nobody knew.
Nobody knew that. Who knew? Yeah, he's basically a caricature of what I would envision people in other countries.
He's a caricature of a clown.
He is, but he's a caricature of the ugly American. He is us. He to me is like the satire essentially of how we are portrayed in the world. Like that is how I would envision we are portrayed in the world based on what we put out in the world. And so I can't think of a better representative of the arrogance, the imperialism, the corporatism, the xenophobia. Like I actually can't think of a better representative of that than he is. So, you know, and that's unfortunate. People don't like him, a lot of it, because they don't want to look in the mirror and look at what we've become as a nation. And I think that is, we have to have some serious soul searching and decide what we want to do and where we want to be. Well, and they don't like him.
I've had the pleasure and privilege of speaking with both Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and I am so glad that they are in Congress because they have opened up the discussion, which is long overdue, of what we are doing to other countries for profit. It's not for national security. These people are not going to attack us. The best reason they have for attacking us is what we're doing with sanctions, what we're doing when we invade them. When the Marines were in the barracks in Beirut, they were walled behind immense fortifications, and they were truck bombed, and 287, something like that, were killed. At the same time, in just houses scattered around Beirut, there were forces from 3 of our NATO allies. None of them were killed. They were setting up community childcare, community health centers. That's what their soldiers were doing. They were paying rent to stay in the houses and was a chief source of income in poor communities. We were holed up in this big citadel, big castle, and a friend of mine stayed with me 3 or 4 months, and it took till about the 3rd month before he talked about his time in Beirut. And he was in that barracks a couple of months before it was blown up, and he was saying that the Marines would go out at night. There was a curfew. Nobody's supposed to be out in the street. And they would come back home with bags full of heads.
Yeah, we've definitely, I feel like we've definitely devolved in a lot of ways. And it's, you know, it's not, to me, it's very connected in a few ways. So, you know, we have a lot of violence here, and people are always talking about the gun issue, what are we doing about the gun issue? And to me, it is directly related to how we are as a people in terms of the level of violence and desperation. So you cannot have a society where there's no social safety net and you have people that are just desperate beyond all belief.
Yes.
In the same country as people where there's more guns than people, and not anticipate that there's going to be a lot of death and destruction. Like, that's just ignorant. Not to mention what we do around the rest of the world, which, you know, I do think that we are just a violent people. And I do think that you can't have the military that we have around the world doing what it's doing and not expect to see violence at home. And so I do see that this general connection between violence, desperation, and hate, sort of like this circle that just sort of feeds on itself.
Well, we're both going to Congress, and the things we can do in Congress include trying to make, and I don't have a trick for doing this, stand your ground laws debase human life. They are abominations, and the people who voted for them, they're Democrats in the state of Florida who voted for the original bill. The Police Bill of Rights have been pushed by the police unions. The only reason they exist is because the Congress are Tallahassee people, different states passed the Police Bill of Rights because it's the only thing they want to give to the union. And
Right.
it degrades being a policeman because it means generally, effectively, that no policeman can be prosecuted for murder. And in that situation, when you cheapen life that way, the worst qualities of mankind are pulled forth. And we can stop encouraging this by our legal system. We have to do that much. Does that fix the problem? It at least gives a structure in which the worst impulses are not rewarded, not tolerated.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff that I think needs to be done as far as like policing and in this country. But one of the key things, obviously, to me is the demilitarization of our police force that
Oh, yes.
has gotten to the point where, and you know, it's at this point, it's like our local police forces are just subsidizing for Boeing and Lockheed and all the, I guess, the overflow of whatever military industrial complex supplies that they just need to, you know, be able to profit off of.
Well, yes. There are things that you can do at the federal level to change the correction system. You use the word corrections. It's now a punishment system. It needs to be a correction system. And you
It should definitely not be for profit. I know that.
All profit should be removed. They should be able to at least use the cell phone and call their family 5 times a day. If they choose to work, they should be getting the minimum wage, and they should be able to put aside for when they get out of jail and need to start a lawn mowing company or something because they can't get a job. Or they should have the option of giving it to their family so they have a family when they get out. Because you want them to be rehabilitated, not to be punished.
Well, that's what we want. That's what we want.
Yes, I said you.
Yes, that's what we want. But that doesn't happen when people are getting a per head profit every day.
No. That is
incarcerated.
The voted for profit prisons are the ones who should be in them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I learned this a long time ago doing criminal defense. You know, I had a case. The kid was 17 years old. He grabbed a woman's purse in front of a supermarket, ran off with the purse. There was like less than $50 in the purse, but because he did it from her person, it was aggravated, and there were these situations. And I got this case a couple years later. He had been on probation, and it was a motion to revoke his probation. But I remember thinking, and that was right around the time that we bailed out all those corporations from fleecing us. I want to say, it was at a point when there were all these like golden parachutes being delivered to all these CEOs that were just ripping off people like Bernie Madoff and all that stuff. And it's like, this kid stole $30.
Yeah.
But the rich people, the punishment for people of means is completely different than the punishment for people without means. And that is a huge problem for me.
Now, surprisingly, I only learned this in the last 4 years. When the savings and loan debacle occurred under Reagan, Reagan actually was upset with the banks for screwing up. 650 people, bankers, went to jail. And when pretty much far worse things and far greater magnitude happened in 2008 and 2000 before.
And what happened to those guys? Because I don't think Obama prosecuted anybody.
That's right. Obama did not prosecute. The same division, some of the same people from Reagan's day were still there, and he told them not to prosecute anyone.
Yeah.
The progress that we've made is that we removed punishment from crime over that 30 years. That's what lobbying did. Bad lobbying, the lobbying that comes with the little...
Yeah, it's corporate, it's for profit, it's for shareholders, it's not for the common good. And that is a very distinct feature of, for-profit prisons. And people don't, You know, we have 2 million people incarcerated in this country. So essentially we're the world's largest penal colony. And of those 2 million, probably about 30% of them shouldn't even be incarcerated. And that's when you look at things like ridiculous oversentencing, ineffective assistance of counsel, people that just don't even have a fair
which
trial.
came from the 1993 crime bill written by one Joe Biden.
Exactly. And that is that's very big deal to me. So, you know, it's definitely not something that I can just easily overlook.
No. So.
Well, Jen, we passed your time limit.
Yeah, I gotta head off. I gotta go do my live stream, but thank you so much for having me on.
So good of you to join us. Thank you.
And so anybody watching, gen2020.com, check us out. You can follow me on Twitter at GenFL23. And that's it.
Fantastic.